Well, hello, everyone. Uh, we're happy that you've joined us today, and let's just sign on here for a moment to our Silicon Global online show. As you know, we've been doing this fairly regularly since April of 2020. Let's see, was it 2000? Yes, 2000, April 2000. So we've done over 30 shows now, and we've had numerous venture capitalists on from around the world. But today we have a real superstar joining us, Jim Robinson of RRE Ventures. He's in New York City. And hi, Jim, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine, hanging out. I'm ready to have a little chat with you about the latest and greatest that you're up to. And I'm sure everyone on the online audience is ready to ask you a great question. They can type in a question right here, and we'll get to it as we go along. We'll also.
You're going to read them, or do I need to read them?
Well, I usually read them and select them out, but I'm happy if you want to do that as well. And if there's one in particular that you like, that you want to answer right away, that's fine. This is a very informal.
We'll just have to do this a bunch.
Okay, yeah, well, me too. Yeah, so I've been writing a lot for the past 12 months, and my eyesight has gone downhill. I've been writing so much that when I go to sleep at night, I'm actually writing in my sleep, which is terrible. I've got to get away from that. These sentences go by me, and I think, no, I didn't write that, did I? I need to rewrite that. But anyhow, conversation is much easier chatting, particularly with Jim, who I've known for quite some time. And Jim has been a very loyal supporter of Silicon Dragon, Silicon Global over the years. He's spoken at our events at NASDAQ and in New York and LA as well. And so, Jim, you're always such a great sport. Thank you so much for that.
Well, happy to be here, and it's good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe in person sometime soon too. So let me just say a few words about Jim here, and we'll get going as soon as I get the slide to move. All right, there's lots of material about Jim, as you can see here. He's the co-founder general partner at RRE Ventures, set that up in New York. Jim is Jim Robinson the fourth, right, Jim?
Technically, that's right. Yep.
Okay. He is a big fan of these areas, which I list here, certain interest areas: crypto, enterprise, healthcare, and fintech. He's been an early investor in mobile payments and blockchain startups. He is, I don't know how Jim, you even have time for this Zoom chat, because all these board observer seats and co-founder and director and exits here, and on the board of Empire State Realty Trust and Partnership Fund for New York City. Yeah, it's just an amazing career. And of course, an MBA from Harvard, what else, right? Degree in computer science and business administration from Antioch, very nice. And previously at APT Venture Capital, and doing a lot of investment banking. And then you were a founder of some enterprise, IV Systems, enterprise something or other. You can tell us more about, Jim, what IV Systems is. And he also brings some China experience, US-China experience to the table. So I think that this all adds up to quite a lot of accomplishments here that you can see right here on this page. So hopefully you've absorbed all that and you know what kind of questions to ask Jim. Okay, so just please go ahead and type your questions in at any time. It's fine. I'm going to stop the share now. And here we go with Jim. Oh, okay, I can see myself now. All right, good. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to lately, and what interests you and what you find really fascinating lately in the world?
Well, I mean, that could be a long list or a very short one, I guess.
Right.
From my perspective, at least as it relates to general areas of technology, I remain as as interested in blockchains and crypto today as I was back when I started investing in it in 2013. That hasn't abated. If anything, it's grown. It's a rare reset that in regulated businesses, resets don't come every 20 or 30 years. They tend to take 40 to 50 to really become sort of standards. And that's kind of the nexus that we're at now. So I spent a lot of time on that. But as a firm, we do a lot of things. I mean, we do health IT investing. We do other kinds of fintech that aren't related to blockchains and crypto, although increasingly those two things are coming together. We do enterprise software, we do some hardware, we've done robotics, 3D printing, VR. I mean, it's a very broad sort of landscape of companies in which we invest. And of course, I'm still on boards of companies that I invested in prior years before I went sort of full-time on crypto that, are in health, and they're in enterprise software and food ordering and media. So my day isn't just crypto.
Okay. Yeah, because I was looking at your various portfolio companies, and I saw other companies in there that are not this. There's one healthcare company I saw, and then there's the Skim, which sounded pretty interesting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of your portfolio companies outside of crypto to begin with.
Sure. Yeah, because once we start on crypto, we may not come back.
Yeah, right.
The last year for me has been obviously with the markets that we find ourselves in the pandemic, where in a never before seen amount of capital available to startup companies, to tech companies. A lot of my job in the last year and a half, maybe year and a half, 2 years now, has been helping shepherd companies into late growth stage rounds and then IPOs. So we've had a couple of IPOs. We've done a number of SPAC related transactions that have gone through the full process. Lots of big rounds. And some of my older companies, Olo's one that actually goes back to I spent about 5 years just doing, or largely just doing mobile payments. And one of those companies was Olo, and that was an investment I made 13 years ago that, it basically, you use Olo, you probably just don't know it. And particularly in the pandemic, you used it. When you order food from many of the chains, probably at this point, more than half the chains that are brands that some of the back of the house systems that allow for that order to be registered, fulfilled, and then, sent to your home or office are run by Olo. The software is run by Olo. And so that's one that went public a couple of quarters ago and has, of course, had a fabulous experience in these markets. These markets may not last very long, but they certainly have been receptive to it. And it's a great company with classic software profile margins and growth rates and so forth. Another one, which you probably see on TV, maybe more than you wish you did, is a company called Noom, which is a diet and weight loss application. Actually, it's their series of products, but that's the main one that they're most known for. And they've had, amazing growth in this time. People, trapped at home, often not keeping up with their routines, weight gain, and I think something for many of us that we've struggled with. So the category in general has grown, and Noom has grown at a multiple of that. So that's one I spent a lot of time on, not crypto related. I've yet to figure out an angle for crypto there, but give me time. So those are a couple of examples. You mentioned the Skim.
Yeah.
Carly and Danielle, the co-founders of that, have done something very hard, which is find a way to communicate to young females about hard news. It's pretty easy to do if you're doing fashion entertainment, and of course it's very easy to talk to young males, but it's quite hard to actually talk to young females. I've only known 2 entrepreneurs in 30 years that have really done it. One was Candy Carpenter at iVillage, you may remember.
Yes.
And the other was daily candy, and those are really the only two examples I know of. And the Skim has done that. And they've got, I don't even know how many million subscribers now, and they've launched financial services products. So there I may have a chance to get them into the crypto world at some point.
Okay.
We shall see.
Yeah, so crypto crosses it's a horizontal, technology, right? It's not vertical. It crosses all, like cybersecurity, the same thing.
Yeah, well, it's a great observation in technology. People often mix verticals and horizontals. AI, for instance, is not a vertical. Crypto is not a vertical. All of these can touch every industry. There are many other examples. Cybersecurity, you mentioned. Sometimes there are verticals that become horizontals, which would be the case with crypto, arguably the case with AI, at least in its earlier days, and maybe still now in some places. But that's right. These are horizontal technologies, and the real difference is how fast do they invade industries and become pervasive. And the answer is, you can pretty much score it based on how regulated is the business.
Right. So, well, why don't you talk about Venmo? That's one that everybody knows, I think, and that is pervasive, right? Talk to us about how the whole buildup of Venmo and your involvement in it, and how
Sure.
it all happened.
Well, Venmo was founded by Ikram and Cortina, a couple of engineers who were great engineers who had a sort of a general notion, which, by the way, isn't how people use the product today. The notion, the original conceit of the company, if you will, was this idea that if you and I are friends and we know each other and you owe me $12, and maybe that occurs, on a regular basis, we go out to meals, whatever, then you effectively auth me into your bank account, with some parameters, and I can just go deduct it. That was actually the original sort of method behind it. But, along the way, they built, an app that was great at things like check splitting. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot to think from I can go in after the fact and charge you or deduct from you or debit from you to why can't we do it real time?
Yeah.
And they struggled at first. And in fact, the antibodies that are prevalent in financial services damn near killed them before they got off the launch pad.
Oh.
We really wrote the term sheet for the seed. It was not a no-brainer at RRE. It was very controversial, as to whether we should even do that round.
Really?
And a few days before their initial South by Southwest launch, they lost the only interchange rail they had, which was through American Express. And we worked on that, and they were able to go from there. The postscript on Venmo, because it grew quickly, because it became hot, and then its growth began to stall, and a lot of that was just growing pains, figuring out how to manage. You had two young entrepreneurs that really didn't have a lot of experience in leadership, and adding people to that, and then adding investors that had other views of how things should be built. Ultimately, we sold it to a company called Braintree, which was a processor, effectively, sort of like a Stripe, competitor in those days. And all that sold to PayPal. So, if I have a regret, it's that we sold it too early, but it has become a standard.
Yeah. What was the sale date?
Oh, good Lord. Well, the first one, Braintree, was probably, with COVID, you've got to add a year and a half to everything.
Oh.
Maybe 7 years, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I got kind of confused over what year were you in, because I'm thinking, well, yeah, we must be. Sometimes people say, well, 2022 is coming up, and I'm thinking, 22?
It was just 2019, a little while ago.
Right, it was 29. We skipped 2 years, didn't we? What year are we in anyhow? And I'm not the only. I think other people are having the same kind of experience of not being able to really calculate where they are or judge where they are time-wise. Anyhow, maybe not so bad geographically, but certainly time-wise. Jim, when was the last time you really traveled long distance?
Well, I mean, I go between city pairs that are fairly close frequently, whether it's New York, Florida, Boston, Philly, DC, Atlanta. I'm not sure any of that really qualifies
Yeah,
relative to your question. I haven't been to the West Coast, which is a place I was frequently before
sure.
all of this,
Yeah.
since it all began.
Oh, uh-huh.
There was one trip that I almost did, but it ended up actually, because I have a number of boards out there, but it
Sure.
ended up at the last minute. We were trying to see if we could sneak an in-person, and plans changed when half the people weren't going to come anyway.
Oh, I
So,
see.
so it has been a while, and I haven't been overseas
Yeah,
since pre-COVID. I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
been to China. I was there just before, but I have not been since.
yeah. Any plans to go
Not at the moment, none.
overseas? Or-
And part of that's, how much of that is COVID today? Obviously a year ago was. But today, I think it's as much, I'm much more leery of investing there. And, in fairness, I also spent a dozen years on a board flying there 4 or 5 times a year. And, that after you do that for 10, 12 years, it
Yeah.
gets old.
Oh, yeah. You can say I did that. No reason to continue doing that. I did that.
Right.
That's kind of my own motto of how I'm looking at it, because I'm not going now either, and I was going like you 4 or 5 times a year, and having events there and covering news there. But a lot of journalists are not going there now. Yeah, I'm a little more focused on what's happening in the U.S. now, which there's a lot happening, of course, because. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that Silicon Valley is still the global hub of technology, or do you think there are other cities that are on the rise that could take some of Silicon Valley's thunder?
Well, as you look back through history, it's often been true that there were sort of city pairs where one was academic and one was commercial. This goes back to Corinth and Athens. And I mean, you can go back literally thousands of years and find this sort of general thing to be true. And it's kind of important. You want to have a tech center that's developing new technologies, which tend to come in bands. They don't happen, every 10 years, major transformational technologies, really to be, kind of off on its own, where it can experiment a lot and take a lot of chances. And Silicon Valley is basically derivative of 2 industries, and really only 2. One is the transistor semiconductor, which of course all software, the internet, everything that people think of, apps, all of that comes from,
Right.
as we experience it today with the internet of entertainment and information. And then biotech. And those are the sort of the twin towers, if you will, of Silicon Valley. And in those 2 towers, certainly in the US, and I would say almost everywhere globally, if not everywhere, not in every subsector, but in general, some of the most formative thinkers and some of the dominant technology development that happens in the world does still happen in those 2 areas. But what you also see in history is as technologies, massive transformational ones, become sort of, I don't want to say democratized, because it hasn't always been in democracies, but become accessible to people, meaning it's beyond the technical layer to the point where average people with less training can use them in their life or start businesses around them, integrate into their world. As that accessibility happens, it's sort of the rise of the rest. And you have commerce centers, around the globe that can adopt. So, the rise of New York, the rise of Austin, obviously, the Northwest, and now Georgia, and now in Florida. And I've missed as many as I've named.
Yeah.
The fact is, today, you can start a company in either of those 2 verticals in any town you can pretty much think of. I mean, Coeur d'Alene may be a stretch because of, just normal restrictions of people and ability to have access to bandwidth, labs, facilities, shipping, all of that.
Right.
But most places you can think about, you can outsource engineering teams, and not just engineering, but marketing, operations people, salespeople, in a way that you never could before because of network technologies. And in fact, I would say over half the businesses we back today, it's almost become quaint, the question of where's your headquarters?
Uh-huh.
What we really mean today in my business is where's the CEO going to be? And sort of a core group around them.
Right.
But with the ability to sort of do on demand and run it a network in a reliable way with 5 nines of certitude that you're going to be able to connect on a whatever frequency and basis you need,
Right.
and have accountability and audits and all of the things you need to perform.
Sure.
You can do it anywhere. So that's a great thing for the world, and it
Yeah.
vastly accelerates technology adoption.
Oh,
Now,
definitely. Yeah.
in terms of what's next, they'll probably start as verticals.
They'll probably start.
As verticals somewhere,
Oh, as vertical.
not in a major commerce center, but in a major tech center.
Right. Right. And you could see specializations happening in various tech centers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they tend to play to the strengths of their local market. New York's a big one because it's the US's largest commerce center, one of the largest commerce centers in the country. It's got, or in the world, it's got 10 industries that are anchored there.
Mm-hmm.
But other cities have 2 or 3, and so the tech stack you see draws from the domain expertise of the people that live there, and the networks that they built. So they tend to twin very closely to what was already there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how many of your companies right now is the CEO in Silicon Valley? What percentage wise?
It's gone down a lot. Nowadays, let me answer sort of in the reverse way.
Okay.
We're probably something like 60%, call it New York MSO, tri-state area.
Okay.
We don't target it. That's just kind of what it's been for the last decade. Of course, there was a time when 95% of our investing was Silicon Valley. Back in the days when I maintained an apartment, a car, and all that stuff, and I haven't done that in a long time.
Right.
We even had an office there for a number of years. So if roughly 60% is New York, probably 20-ish% is West Coast, let's call it Seattle, San Diego corridor, but most of that's Silicon Valley, a couple of Seattle, Portland, a couple, LA, kind of thing, but mostly Silicon Valley. And then the rest are kind of what we deem best of breeds wherever they were. And that can be in places like Boston or Philly or Atlanta, or, we always tend to have deals in those places. Chicago, we've got a couple of companies. And oddly enough, we've always had an investment or 2 in Florida. And that's an area of growth. Obviously, Austin, we've done a bunch in 3 years, is an area of great growth. But so is Denver, and Denver's growing a lot. So, really domestic US is how we think about the world. And
Sure.
I'm the only aberration that every 10 years decides to place a bet 8,000 miles away, then, Karen feed it.
Well, you're a very creative person, open-minded person.
It may just be that my partners are smarter. I don't know. But,
well, in hindsight, do you think, how do you feel about your investments in China, just looking back, or U.S. China? They weren't strictly China, they were U.S. China, right?
Well, my thesis was actually sort of counter to many. I didn't have really any interest in investing in the country, even when I was investing. I was very interested in outbound. So I wanted to invest in companies that were Chinese companies,
right,
but whose goal was to serve a community of Chinese primarily out in the world.
Okay.
So it was not, can I play in the local markets? I always felt like the big fluffy sheep in those discussions. Meaning, you're either a wolf or you're a sheep, and I felt like the sheep. I'd get off the plane and, feel like, if I look at too many companies that are here locally, I better have some really good people that I trust that are from here, because otherwise I'm going to get, the short end of the stick. But I was fascinated with, and you remember 15, 20 years ago, people from mainland, and particularly those that weren't just in the couple of cities that sort of mattered then, had not traveled. They simply had not gone out into the world, and they were starting to.
Right.
And, much of the world didn't know that they really existed until all of a sudden they began to travel. So travel, tourism, financial services, all of these were areas of great interest. There are companies like China UnionPay that even to this day, it's remarkable. If you were to poll Americans, most wouldn't have heard of it. And those that would, if you said, do you think it's the size of Visa, would say, no, maybe it's half. And of course, it's the size of Visa and American Express rolled together and then some.
Right.
So even today, there's a naivete about the size of things over there. I don't know what all the more recent political developments mean for outbound.
Right.
Obviously, there's been a great deal of curtailment in financial flows and
Right.
the ability to expatriate funds, and that's not surprising, given the current state of the world and the leadership there.
Mhm.
But that was always my focus there. It was really the outbound.
Yeah, I think that was counter, and I think it's a very smart strategy. And
Well, I
so
missed a few, but that happens.
well, that happened. Yeah. So how do you really source deals today? Is things easier today or harder today with COVID and remote working and Zoom?
So deal flow is up. I could tell you that it's up, because of the usual constraints of people have to get in touch and how do they do it? Now they have to do it through networks. But I think there's another factor involved, which is more startups are happening than ever before. There's more capital flowing than ever before.
Yeah.
And, to the extent that you've invested over a long period of time in a bunch of different industries, they tend to find you. There's a lot of activity. We've never been busier. I don't, whether busy translates to future success is always a question. In our business, you sort of want to go out and see everything, but the reality is the people that do the best tend to be very focused on just a few things.
Right.
It's very easy to sort of, the easy part of the job in venture is putting money out. It's easy to give somebody a check and you like it and you think they're interesting and smart. The harder part is obviously all of the follow through with that.
Right.
So we try to sort of blend those two, but deal flow tends to come to us in most categories. Occasionally, if we go into something new. So for example, historically, we've done some green related investing here and there, some of the early aughts, which turned out to not really be the right time for some of it, even though they were compelling ideas at the time. We're back looking again. But what does that mean for us? Well, in our firm, the way we process is we take a partner or two and we say, your job for the next 6 months is to spend half your time or more going as deep as you can, going to the universities, talking to all the academics, meeting every team you can. And the only thing we ask of you is that when you come back to the table in some number of months, you tell us straight out if you think that we shouldn't do anything there.
Right.
But the process of doing that is you circulate through a narrow vector of what you're looking for actually generates an awful lot of deal flow, just that process alone.
Okay. All right. So
And sometimes we don't do it. So quantum computing, we spent, well over a half a year, probably 9 months flying on. This was when you could travel freely about the country.
Yeah.
And Canada and other places, we flew around and met with a lot of professors and a lot of scientists who all had students and TAs and so forth, who were all interested in starting companies. We actually made, to date, not a single investment in the space. And there are a bunch of reasons why we've done that. But certainly for a couple of years after that, we saw most of the things happening in that space. To this day, you may remember that we had done MakerBot years ago, 3D printing company, long ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we do one company once based on just, it was interesting and we liked the gang.
Yeah.
To this day, we see many, if not most of the 3D printing companies, and we've not done one since because people look for things that have succeeded.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I was in Youngstown, Ohio recently. You know, I'm originally from Ohio. So I did a couple of road trips through that neck of the woods. And so Youngstown has a whole 3D printing
Yeah, they do.
hub
Yeah.
going there. Have you been? Yeah, Youngstown Business Incubator is pretty
I
interesting.
know about it. I haven't been to it, but I have heard about it from several people over time.
Uh-huh.
And of course, that actually makes a ton of sense, particularly in the enterprise side of 3D, which is something that, MakerBot was only tangentially into, was starting
Yeah,
to grow its business profile in,
right.
and particularly in automotive. Um, and a lot of people don't realize that today, entire manifolds, other heavy things that would hurt if you dropped them on your foot, get printed in 3D printers. And I'm talking complex metals too, not just
Oh,
various
yeah.
polymers.
Yeah, no, I met with a company that's makes industrial cores and molds that basically go into machine
Yep, you
parts.
froze. I don't know if it's you or me. There
What?
you are. So you froze for a minute, but you came back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So I met this company that does sand printing, 3D sand printing, and they make industrial parts. And some of their
Yeah.
customers are huge customers like Caterpillar, big machinery companies. And this company is in the Youngstown area. So it's just, a small to medium-sized business, but they got into 3D printing, basically saved their whole company by getting into it. And they got into it because Youngstown has all these 3D printing experts. And
Yep.
they also have America Makes in Youngstown too.
Right.
And that's located in Youngstown. So pretty interesting stuff going on there. I met some other startups there as well. I could tell you more later offline. But maybe some good investment prospects for you.
Sure. Always
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, Hal Kelman is on the listening end, and he always has some good questions. And also Michael Jelliman is listening in, and he has good questions too. So I encourage you, Hal, do you have any questions you want to write in here? Or just you want to talk? You want to talk to Jim? I'll push the button and allow you to talk. How about that? Jim, you want to say anything?
Hey, Harold, how are you?
Hi, Jim. H&Q and Robert Stevenson were great for 30 years. I mean, it was shooting fish in a barrel. And previously, I could make 100 times my money in the public market. The thing that most worries me is valuations. Looking ahead, I think 10x instead of 100x. I've had 600 to 1 gains in the public market, and 5 of them came from Hamilton Quist and Robbie Stevens. I don't see that happening in the future. Do valuations bother you right now?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I guess the answer is, when I'm a buyer, they bother me, and when I'm a seller, I'm okay with it. No, listen, it's something we struggle with a lot. It's not just that the velocity is higher than it's ever been, and there's more money than there's ever been available in our world, but it's that listen, this all tracks back to how many Federal Reserves of the world are printing, and the answer is all of them. And so that's created a huge velocity, and everything's inflated. It's very hard to buy in at this point. We're in the business of making investments. Now, of course, that at any given time, we have, call it, upwards of 120 portfolio companies. And so those folks are in business of raising money for their next round. And it has been a fair sea for them, but a tougher sea for us making new investments. Part of it is you have to, in our case, get your head around the fact that you're buying in based on your belief in the people and the mission, and but prices are high. So, but the only thing I would say is, we may be in year 12 of a bull market, and we are, although it's the last 2 years seem like an anomaly, but we are in year 12 of a bull market, and people forget that. This will not last forever.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Who else has a question? Shelby, how about you? Shelby? Would you, oh, I'm going to push your button here. Shelby, do you have anything to say? Ask Jim a question.
Hi,
Okay.
Jim. How are you?
Oh, there's
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Well, great conversation with you. I don't have a specific question, but my company is in shared economy space. So what are your thoughts with regards to companies that are sort of similar to Uber and Airbnb, and have you invested in similar ones, or what do you look towards those?
So, one of the great things about network technologies is they allow what would have been, if not impossible, extremely difficult and highly costly in the past to be actually easier than building silos. And shared economy companies are a great example of that. All of us are such beneficiaries of shared economy companies that have launched and practices. And it's not just in corporations. You see a little bit of this in government. You see it in a number of different areas as well, in education. Some of it's pro bono, some of it's obviously for profit. It depends on how it's a shared economy. It depends on how hard it is. Shared economies are at minimum two-sided markets, and often 3 and 4 sides, if you will. You got a provider providing a service, and they've got a network that effectively acts as their megaphone, and then they need to have people that hit the bid, right? That find interest at fairly low cost, and then come in and try it, and then repeat. And so the alchemy of getting that right. How much do you put in resources to build out the capability and all of the feature sets before you got that customer inflow? So what we found is that, I think things like minimally viable are overused generally, but here, and by the way, they don't basically exist in things like financial services, regulated businesses. But here, I think depending on the kind of company you're talking about, it makes a lot of sense to allow the market mechanisms to provide feedback. But there's never been a better time to build a shared economy business, for sure.
Good. That's a great answer.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Sam, would you like to ask Jim a question or comment on anything?
Yeah, hi, thanks so much. Hi, Jim. I've enjoyed the observations. Have you seen any impact of equity crowdfunding? We're actually doing an equity crowdfund round right now for my startup. And we found it to be a fascinating process and really very, eye-opening. But a couple of years ago, I think mainstream VCs were sort of looking down their noses at it. So is there a more accepting approach these days, or what have you been seeing?
Well, it's a great question. So crowdfunding is, kind of one of the latest versions of really angel investing. But then, of course, with the media, that quickly becomes a sort of the articles write themselves about how they'll displace and replace venture. In the time that I've been a venture investor, I've seen the rise of angel syndicates. They didn't used to exist. It used to be each person kind of on their own, then angel syndicates. Then they formalized, this is SV Angels, folks like that began to formalize this in the early mid-90s. Then accelerators, incubators, those kinds of things.
Yep.
Particularly those that had some capital attached, informal or formal. And we've helped actually start a few of these over the last couple of decades. All of those did an amazing job of helping entrepreneurs and talent find early money, often an easier process than they used to have to go through, of going almost door to door to get early traction and to start building a business. It actually, all of those things, and crowdfunding was sort of the next version of that, created a lot more early stage companies that were really seed stage, which meant for folks like me, we were busier than ever, sort of taking on that next check.
Yep.
There is the possibility, and by the way, there's version of crowdfunding in crypto today, that also, portends the possibility of doing checks that are so large that they really encroach on venture. The near-term risk for venture is really more, and this is cyclical with business cycles, but it's really more corporate and hedge fund and PE and other folks that, buy a bunch of stock late stage, have a great experience and say, boy, 10X was good. Sure would have been nice to have 50. Maybe next time we buy 5 times the stock at an earlier price. But those come and go with cycles. And so, but listen, we've used crowdfunding. We think crowdfunding is a great way to go. I've had a nephew use crowdfunding. And we missed a couple of great early crowdfunding plays that maybe we should have backed. But anything that empowers nodes, people that have some sort of expertise, strong opinion about how something should be but isn't, to give them a shot at getting something started, I think is a win for all of us. And the day something comes along that can replace me, I'll be one of the first to back it. So let me know if you find that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find. I think some venture folks view it as kind of an overlap or some kind of threat or something. And I think you're exactly right. It's just organized angel investing, basically, on a much broader base, because literally anybody with a credit card can just chip in. So in a way, it's creating a bigger funnel of somewhat developed deals that lead into the venture ecosystem. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and part of this was validated a few years ago as part of the Jobs Act, which all of us worked on in varying degrees. And, the sort of democratization of access to private and, without the old sort of stick in the mud rules. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of that, but with this proviso, and that is that, remember, year 12 of a bull market. What will happen in a downturn, and particularly if it's enough of a downturn, is people will have invested in things thinking they can only go up. And that manifests in legal action. It manifests itself in class actions. The lawyers think they can, and so there is a risk to a lot of what came out of Jobs Act. But I think on balance, it was hugely positive for us.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Let me pick on Michael Jalliman now. Michael, are you ready to ask a question or comment? Michael, are you there? You're a bit sketchy. Okay. Well, let me pick up while we're waiting for you. Then let me pick up on a comment that Hal Kelman mentioned earlier about fintech being a multi-trillion-dollar industry with at least 125 companies. Stripe is a sure win, or any other candidates, Jim?
Oh, listen, I mean, first of all, with a US-centric focus, there alone, you could come up with many. Really, when I think of fintech winners, I think of it more by category. Are they in the AUM business, the asset business? Are they in the trading or brokerage business? Yeah. Leaving aside the arguments that some of these businesses should go away and will with crypto, we'll stay with the basic models that we as humans today understand.
Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can.
Hear you.
Yep.
So what is your perspective on artificial intelligence?
What is your perspective on artificial intelligence? Is his question.
So it's a great question, right? You sort of get in trouble going either way on it. So I'll go both ways. Listen, AI, first of all, it's going to happen. There's no point in debating whether it's going to happen. And second, will bring revolutionary changes for human beings. And many of those will be amazing breakthroughs and very positive and help us a lot. I mean, if you think about the problems we have, whether it's, deep fakes or it's, shared intelligence that's truth and fact versus not, or mean, there's, and of course in medicine, I mean, there's so many different areas where AI saves dollars, money, time, and a whole lot of scraped knees and dead bodies, that, it's going to have a phenomenal impact in pretty much every business. That said, there is obviously also a very scary side to it. And when I say scary, it's not so much the bias in data sets and so forth, because we can figure out over time how to get better at those things. It's more, could there be a point in time where AI starts making decisions that, aren't good for us? And of course, the Hollywood version of that is always, it achieves some sort of sentience and decides that we're a pestilence that needs to be, wiped out. And, frankly, if you were them, you probably can't blame them for concluding that. But that's actually a lot less likely. A lot more likely is that we program in rules that it then exercises, even though we didn't foresee the unpredictable things that come from it. And so keeping a version of a dead man switch there is going to make sense for a long time to come, particularly as you tie it into intelligence apparatus, communications apparatus, energy production. So there are scary things. And of course, as with all, sort of central nervous system technologies, they're all neutral. It's what humans do with them that, matters. And we will have amazing things happen and very bad things happen. And we're just going to have to live with both.
Yeah, good answer. So let me go back to Hal Kelman's question about Stripe. It was a sure winner. Any other candidates out there in the fintech business?
Yes. So I think of it by category. I think of it about, when you think about fintech and financial services, the real question is, what are the problems they're solving? Are they holding money for others so that it's safe? Are they investing money for others? Are they transferring money for others? Are they, leveraging money or lending against? All of these are fundamentally different businesses, and very, very few companies other than the largest banks are in all of them. And most of the contenders to the incumbent thrones, including Stripe, are not yet. They are in pieces of those parts of the puzzle. I mentioned before, regulated businesses are a different animal. It was very easy for the internet in the mid-90s to disrupt media, advertising, publishing. These are no moat businesses. There's no moat. It's, if you have any IP, it's really in the name brand of the journalist or the, so, and there's no regulatory wall to climb or to scale.
Right.
You get into financial services, you get into healthcare, you have enormous walls to scale. Each of those categories I mentioned, and there are others too, have to be scaled one off. So for instance, if you're in InsurTech, and we have a number of investments in the InsurTech space, you wake up one day thinking this is a great idea. I'm going to do this, this, and that. None of the big insurers can do it. And then you wake up the week later and find out that in America alone, you have 54 regulators. 54, that's the number. Because you got one for each state, and then you have a bunch of different federal ones. And so, and they all have opinions. And processes that can take, you watch yourself grow old in the mirror, trying to, get through them. And now some of that's changing, and some by necessity. The bull pushes ahead with the horns, and that starts to force regulatory authorities to adjust. We're seeing this writ large in crypto broadly right now. So there are a lot of winners. I have to be careful who I name because, some friends are in some and others are in some. But the categories that are the most important as it relates to at least the traditional model as now practiced by upstarts in asset management, in trading, in brokerage services, in things like insurance and leveraging and lending, those categories are all at maybe different rates depending on the year, seeing a massive onslaught of new attacks and vectors. Now, that said, if you're asking me, do I think that the JP Morgans, the Citibanks of the world are going to be slayed? The answer is the biggest brands like that are just that. They're brands, they're marketing companies.
Uh-huh.
JP Morgan is not, I mean, it's a financial services bank, of course, with a lot of an investment bank and a lot of other things, but it's really a brand. And those brands will eventually, and also interchange providers, the MasterCards, the Visas, all these folks will eventually buy some of those upstarts. Some of those may get bought by people like Stripe as they get big enough. And
Yeah.
we saw this play out, 20 years ago as well, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But the marriage is happening. The marriage of new entrants and companies that have reached scale and reached not only 10-digit valuations, but 11 and, getting to 12-digit valuations, hundreds of billions, or now they have a full seat at the table. And that's never been true until the last 4 or 5 years. Not even that long, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Well, when I first started in journalism, I actually was covering the insurance business for about 1.5 years. And so I got an initiation there, but I've been tracking what's been happening in InsurTech. And one of the interesting things is in the automotive space, the old conventional way of basing premiums on your age and how old your car is and stuff like that. That's out the window now, because they can measure kind of like how well you drive.
Telematics, for sure.
Yeah, telematics. Yeah.
Fascinating and scary.
Yeah. So one of the companies that I interviewed recently was in Columbus, Root Insurance. And that went public, actually, very good IPO last year. I think it was last year. I'm getting mixed up on the years, as I said before, but I think it was last year. And one of the top IPOs of the year. And, basically, the fellow who started it, he had worked at Nationwide, so he knew that there was room for disruption in the auto insurance business. But anyhow, there's lots of examples like that. I'm sure you've got many in your portfolio that are equally or more exciting. But
yeah, I mean, I try to
yeah.
stay out of the
Anyone
business
else
of
have
predicting which stocks will go well, just because that's always a dangerous game. And frankly, once they're public, I don't generally pay much attention to them.
Oh, yeah.
But
Kind of too late then, right? It's too late.
it's too late. Yeah.
Too late. You got to be early. And that,
Right.
I was looking at your bio, and you really seem to have a knack of being in early on what's happening. So
It's what we do, but there are things that happen. So Stripe's a great example. We looked at Stripe a couple of times, loved the team, loved the brothers, loved Patrick, but we were in a competitor. That's Braintree was a competitor. And so we couldn't invest at the window that we had, which was very early. We were dumb enough to think that the price was too high at Square, at all of like 30 million, valuation. And that happens. There are things that, but we tend to see most of those. We also turned down PayPal, but that was, in a different era and for different reasons at the time.
Yeah.
So, these things are going to happen. And a lot of the time, companies that, you would have forecast weren't going to do it. I think with Stripe, we always knew that was an amazing team. With Jack at Square, Jack's an amazing person, but at the end of the day, it was not a foregone conclusion. I mean, he was trying to do something we had tried to do at a company called Apriva about 15 years before, dongles on phones. In those days, dongles on Blackberries. And the world rejected him resoundingly. It ended up working in part because of his, he's a force of nature and could attract a lot of great talent, and in part because the world was readier for it. Right. But, not a foregone conclusion. Listen, the first time I met, I guess the second time I ever met Elon Musk, he was pitching me on a car he wanted to make.
Oh, yeah.
It was a 2-seater, and he had a little clay version of it. But he was very proud of the fact that he put, it wasn't going to work because there was no car, there were no batteries, other than the batteries he had put to show us sort of what the dash might look like in the future. This is 7 years before he shipped a car. His first car is 2-seater.
Oh.
And so I go to meet him, and it's in a garage bay in Monterey, California. And he's got a guy who's the current CEO that he had just hired a couple of months before to be the CEO of this new company called Tesla, which doesn't really exist. I mean, it's him and this guy and like 10 engineers doing clay models. And they can't get the batteries to work just to show us the display.
Oh,
And then something begins to spark and they have to unplug it. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You're going to build a car company that's going to be electric. And you can't get that to work. And by the way, a week later, he fired the CEO, which had only been in the job for a few months.
oh, wow.
So, difficult to conclude that we would have what we now have today. But you know what? He's a magician. But a lot of these things that seem like, wow, of course, everybody should have done it, often seem, at the moment of creation or not long thereafter, like really bad ideas.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
the nature of the beast.
right. That's, I guess, disruption, right?
Yeah, but luck too. I mean, Tesla exists today because of the Great Recession. The reality is that the two, nobody cared about the two-seater. They didn't sell very many of them. They were losing tons of money. They had a bunch of leverage. They were in trouble. And the government concluded that it wasn't paying attention to Tesla. It concluded that it needed to save GM and Chrysler. Ford, by the way, didn't need the money. But if you're the government, you can't pick individual winners. You can only pick the sector. And so everybody in automotive was required to take a bunch of money, including Tesla. And it allowed Tesla to survive. They were basically on the skids, not getting the round done. Now, to their full credit, they paid that facility back in like half the time with interest. So they made a lot of use of it. But we wouldn't be talking about Teslas today if it hadn't been for the financial crisis.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Allow them to buy that plant out in Fremont and basically refurbish it.
Yeah, that all came after that. That's right. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, wow, that was a wonderful story, Jim. And I never heard that before. And so we really, really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone, for your great questions tonight. And if we didn't get to it next time, anyone who wants to ask a question, just raise your hand so I can see that, and then I can call on you. But Jim did a great job of answering all the questions that we got. And so, Jim, any last words at all? Words of wisdom from you?
No, I think other than, we all need to stay safe in this environment. Who the hell knows what's going to happen next? It's a weird world. It's gotten a lot weirder in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I just wish everybody the best.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Wish you the best. And good night, everyone, or good morning for those who are over in Asia. But I think most of you, this is a good evening. So good evening, everyone. See you now. Oh, actually,
Bye, y'all.
Yeah, our next show, I forgot to mention, our next show, next Thursday, two Dans, Dan Schwartz and also Daniel Gould, who is Business Development Director at Alexa. And both of them are, we talked a little bit tonight about angel investing. Both of them are in the Band of Angels group out in Silicon Valley. So two Dans next Thursday, 4 p.m. And thank you again, Jim. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.